My name is Clynita Graffin-Reed. I am a training and technical assistance coordinator here at the UW Smart Center. We are so happy today to have you here for our 2024 speaker series. And today we are going to have our friend and colleague, Dr. Nikole Hollins-Sims, which you guys already know that. That's why you're joining us, because you know that Dr. Hollins-Sims is going to bring us some great information. The 2024 speaker series is promoting a positive school climate for student mental health, effective data, systems, and practices. Before we get started, we want to always take time to do a land acknowledgement. The UW Smart Center and Northwest MHTTC acknowledge that we learn, live, and work on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people who walked here before us and those who still walk here. We're grateful to aim to respectfully live and work on these lands with the Coast Salish and Native people who call this home. Today's event, and this is a series. So this entire series is brought to you by the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or Northwest MHTTC, and the University of Washington School Mental Health Assessment Research and Training Center, or we like to refer to ourselves as UW Smart Center. So this is a 4-part series. We had an intro, and then we had our colleagues from the UW Smart Center, along with a partner from an LEA in Washington when was this? We took off for December, and November talked about universal screenings. And if you missed it, you missed a treat, but no worries, because guess what? All of these sessions are recorded. So at the end, we're going to show you where you can go and download the recording. So if you are like, oh my gosh, I need to know more about universal screenings, and you'll want to hear that last presentation, you can go to our website and you can download that. So Dr. Hollins-Sims will be with us in the month of January, and we are extremely blessed that she will be with us again next month. Then in the month of March, we'll have Dr. Rhonda Neese, who is from U of O, who's going to talk to us about bullying prevention. And then we wrap up our series with our dear colleague, Sarah McDaniels, who is going to also do a session on bullying prevention. So again, this wonderful series is brought to you by the Northwest MHTTC as well as the UW Smart Center. I mentioned then a national MHTTC network. Goals of our network are to accelerate the adoption and implementation of EBPs, to heighten the awareness and knowledge and skills of the workforce, and that's the school mental health workforce, to foster both regional and national alliances, and to ensure availability and delivery of what? Publicly available, free of charge. I said it, free of charge, training and technical assistance. So we're located across the country, and Northwest MHTTC is responsible for the area in the brown you see as we're Region 10. All right. I told you a little bit about MHTTC, but again, the Northwest MHTTC is here to help build multi-tiered systems of supports. That's what we're all about, MTSS and PBIS, training the workforce and advancing the research base. And the UW Smart Center, we are here to support research and evaluation, training and technical assistance, and community partnering and outreach for the adoption and implementation of evidence-based practices. Now, what you have been waiting for. I know some of you are probably snowed in earlier. I know in my city, kids were out yesterday for school, and some of you were thinking, I'm so glad that the presentation on Wednesday is going to be virtual, because no snow, no ice, no rain would keep us from delivering Dr. Nikole Hollins-Sims to you. It is my pleasure to present my friend and colleague, Dr. Nikole Hollins-Sims, who is going to talk to us about fostering belonging and staff recruitment and retention. Thank you, Nikole.
Thank you, Dr. Graffin-Reed. And you almost got me singing. I almost called you Diana for a minute. But you're right. Ain't no mountain high enough that could keep me from all of you today. So I'm super excited to have the opportunity to partner again with the Smart Center, with my friend and colleague, Dr. Graffin-Reed, and the team here. I never take it for granted to have these opportunities to share content that I hope will be beneficial to you in the work that you do across any type of environment that you support. And so today's session is about fostering belonging in staff recruitment and retention. And so what I like to do anytime I do a training is simply allow people the chance to get to know me. You've probably heard different things about the book, and I'm excited about that. How cool is that opportunity? But there's more to me than just the professional side. So, in getting to know me a little bit, I wanted to share a few things on that personal side. One is that I am a wife, first and foremost, to Ron Sims, who is the love of my life. We've been married 7 years. And so I often joke when I'm doing trainings that if I have people in the atmosphere who have been married longer, you are our inspiration because we hope to have a long lasting marriage. Um, in addition to that, I am a mom to CJ. CJ is 6 years old and he is a kindergartner. So, mommy is learning all about how to be a school age mom, and I am loving it. And he is loving kindergarten. So, just happy to be and honored to be his mommy. I'm also a puppy parent to Biscuit, who thankfully I have downstairs in the crate so that he doesn't make an appearance, but he may bark. So, if you hear that, please forgive me in advance. But he has certainly made our house a home. I'm going out on a ledge, even though I know there's some Pennsylvania people in the house, thankfully. Anyone who is an IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, or Millersville University alum, hit up the chat and just shout that out. But that's where I was developed in the form of being a school psychologist. And so I am very happy to be a school psychologist by training and have had opportunities that have really been grown out of that school psychology background. And so I'll bring that forward with our content today. In addition, who did I want to be when I grow up? Janet Jackson. Who do I still want to be when I grow up? Janet Jackson. And it's funny that today is the day I'm presenting because if you're a Janet fan, if you're not a Janet fan, I'm going to tell you anyway, she's going back on tour. And she literally just posted the dates yesterday. And since I live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, I'm like 10 minutes from Hershey. So if you've eaten a Hershey Kiss or Hershey chocolate bar, I'm right down the road. She's going to be there in July, and I bought my tickets today. So I will be down on the floor having a great old time dancing with Janet Jackson. So I'm super excited if you can't tell. And lastly, I am a Disney fanatic. And if I had the opportunity in the content today, I would embed Disney all throughout, but that's not the purpose of today's session. But that's a little bit about me. So when we talk about belonging and the people that have helped me feel a sense of belonging and inspiration to do the work that I do, they are my education dreamers. And so I've listed out a number of them, so many to name. And if there are people that I miss, please blame my head and not my heart. But honestly, these are the women, and I specifically chose women to illustrate the power of dreaming and who have created spaces for me to have a sense of belonging. And we'll talk more about what that means from a professional lens, a personal lens, et cetera. And so a couple shout outs because I heard their names already. Pliny Graff and Reed is in here, and she is one of my great friends. She's listed there. Susan Barrett is there, Dr. Kimberly Yannick, so many names. Dr. Amira Hilyansi, who I know is here as well, my ride or die right there. So I'm happy that she is taking time out to be here today. Again, so many names, and I don't want to prolong, but I did want to highlight and give honor to those women. And so what is my story of belonging? And it's funny, we were just joking before we started about being Gen X or millennial or what have you. And funny enough, being born in 1980, I'm considered a Zennial. So the mix of Gen X and millennial. And so looking at these pictures, they're a little pixelated because this was the 90s. And so what I wanted to illustrate here is that when I was growing up, I always felt like I belonged wherever I was in elementary school. That all changed for me when I went into middle school. And some of you may have a story that's similar, like a transition period in your life where you didn't really know who you were, how you fit in, and how you could find your place and your voice. And I can remember that transition for me from 6th grade to 7th grade was huge. I went from private school to now entering public school. And the picture on the left-hand side is a picture of my mom. And believe it or not, she was the assistant principal at my high school. And that's her assistant principal office. And those folks that were flanking her are my close friends from high school. And her office became a space of belonging for us because we attended a school with a variety of different students, Central Dauphin East. If there's East High folks in the space, go ahead and shout that out. But it was different. And we were all seeking connection. And we found it by seeing someone like my mom. She has her own story of belonging that I've shared in other trainings, and I won't do it today. But she created a space for us to feel like we had a place. And that was so pivotal. The picture on the right is of my best friend and I at graduation in high school. And Maya and I have been friends this year, 30 years, lifelong friendship. And when I think back to that transition and wanting to feel connected and belonged, in 8th grade, when I still sat by myself at lunch and didn't have anybody that wanted to sit with me, I was your quintessential nerd. Glasses, braces, smart, at least I thought I was smart. No one wanted to be my friend. And Maya came to our school. And when she came in, she saw me sitting by myself. And I saw her sitting by herself. And somehow we connected. And the story can vary. I feel like I went up to her and said, "Can I sit with you?" I can't remember for sure. But in that moment, we were connected. Belonging can make you feel like you can do anything. It can make you feel like whatever I am poised to do, I have a community beside me that supports me, loves me unconditionally. And what we want is when we're recruiting staff and we're retaining staff, how do we create spaces where examples like this become reality? Now, at work, we're not expected to be best friends. We're not expected to always get along. But at least when I enter the space, I should be able to show up authentically, do the work that I'm charged to do, and allow my mental health to remain intact. And so today's session is really going to focus on how we encourage and create those opportunities for belonging to exist. Now, in this context, we're going to focus it more on education. But what I want us to do is even expand beyond that, because some of us don't work in a school building per se. We work in different places that may be connected to education, and belonging at the staff level is still very valid and relevant. Understanding that belonging is the North Star along this journey of equity and inclusion. So we know that most of the focus around that type of work has been mainly student focused. Today's session is going to be about the adults. And so I'd love to take you on this journey with me. So let's begin with talking about what's called the HELP framework. This is how I think it's important for us to anchor this content in the best way possible. If you've seen me present on the HELP framework before, forgive me, but it's never a bad thing to do a refresher. Dr. Ronald Whitaker from Cabrini University is the originator of this framework. And when he originally presented it, I remember feeling at that moment, this makes so much sense. I finally can put some pieces together on how to do work connected to equity, inclusion, and belonging in a way that is intentional and logical. And so the first part of that HELP framework is the H, which is history. If we don't know our history, what? We're doomed to repeat it. And so we have to be able to start at a place to understand what has worked well with our staff recruitment and retention. What hasn't worked well? Why have people left? Have we done things to ensure that we've created a space where people can authentically tell us why they left? Those exit interviews. And I've been recently with an organization that did stay interviews. Why are you still here? What makes you want to stay here? Those things are important. And that history can inform the practices that follow. So I want to be clear. We can talk about history from a global sense, a national sense, state, regional, et cetera. But let's even dig deeper into the organizational history. We can do that in a school lens. We can do that in an organizational lens to figure out what we can do better in order not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Once we have that information, then how do we overlay that with focusing on equality versus equity? So in this case, for some of you, you may have seen a picture like this all the time. What I want to unpack in this is that if everyone is getting the same thing, no matter what they present with or what they need, that means some of us are not going to experience what we need or be given what we need to the best of our ability. Equity allows for us to see everyone's differences and ensure that the boxes, as you see here, are particularly developed to fit what the needs are, what the strengths are, etc. I use this example as just a concrete way of illustrating this. My husband, who loves Jordans, he's a Jordan head, a sneakerhead. If there's sneakerheads in the place, go ahead and shout that out. He loves to wear his Jordans. If he could, he'd wear them every day. When his job has Friday dress downs, you can guarantee he has them on. Why am I telling you this? Because if I were to try to wear his 12 and a half size shoe, his shoe doesn't fit my foot. And I'm going to fall all over the room trying to make my foot adjust to the size shoe that he has. I need a 6.5 in women's. So because my shoe size is that, if I tried to give him a 6.5 shoe, he's not going to be comfortable at all. He's not going to be able to do what he needs to do because that shoe doesn't fit him. That to me is the most concrete example of illustrating equality versus equity. So we have to be clear that the practices, the procedures, and the policies that we're putting in place are equitable, not always equal. And then what undergirds all of that? Love. So when we talk about love, I'm not talking husband, wife, like Ron and Nikole. I'm talking about relationships. I'm talking about systems of support, systems of care to ensure that whatever we're doing is always anchored in that. And then lastly, we have pedagogy and practices. And in education, and I know even as mental health providers, we are almost conditioned to be helpers and to move with urgency, right? What this illustrates, what this framework says, is we cannot simply neglect the H, the E, and the L and just have a checkbox of what we need to do. Because often we hear, just tell me what to do and I'll do it so things will get better. And while I can understand that need, these three components before that are going to ensure that those practices have sustainability and can last a very, very long time. So this help framework, I want us to continue to stay anchored in it as we move through the content. So Einstein said it best, as we think of that history. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So the innovation that we have to employ to make change is always going to be necessary. And that history, again, is going to inform that movement. And so what is the goal? When I've done trainings in the past, I like to do some level setting around language. And I kept thinking that North Star is belonging. So what kind of precipitates us to get to belonging? And you know, in education, we think in shapes. So originally, my impression was that this was like a triangle, with the base being equity, the middle part being inclusion, and the tip top being belonging. Well, when I thought about it a little bit more intentionally, equity is the core. Inclusion comes out of it. Belonging is the ultimate goal. And so what I tried to do in this graphic here is illustrate definitions to get us to that understanding. So there's a great book called The Deconstruction of DEI. And I may be saying that title wrong, but it's Lily Zhang. And Lily Zhang, it's DEI Deconstructed. I got it now. DEI Deconstructed by Lily Zhang. They have a great definition for equity. The measured experience of individual, interpersonal, and organizational success and well-being across all partner populations. I love that. And the absence of discrimination, mistreatment of or an abuse of all. But that's important right there. The measured experience, being able to know whether or not we're seeing outcomes as a result of the equitable practices we're putting in place at 3 different levels: the individual, how they're interacting with each other, and globally, organizationally. So that's equity. The inclusion part comes from a book called Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity, a game changer book by Floyd Cobb and John Cronapple. And what they do is illustrate inclusion as engagement within a community where the equal worth and inherent dignity of each person is honored. Critical, critical information, because what this says is, I may not have grown up the same way as you. I may not have the same value set as you. I may not even necessarily agree with you, but I can acknowledge that you're a human and I'm a human. And in that, we have equal worth. In addition, we both, whomever it is, have dignity. And when we think about that concept of dignity, Dr. Donna Hicks, who wrote the book Leading with Dignity, which informed the book I just referenced here, she would say that dignity is a birthright and respect is earned. So that birthright right there allows us to have those inclusive conversations. Again, even if I don't agree, even if I've not shared an experience with you, that's the goal. Ultimately, if equitable practices are happening at that core in inclusive surroundings, we can get to a place of belonging. From those same authors, Cobb and Cronapple, it's defined as experiencing appreciation, validation, acceptance, and fair treatment within an environment. 4 indicators. So as you're thinking about evaluating your staff, surveying your staff, and asking them, when's the last time you felt appreciated, validated, accepted, treated fairly? What do you think their answers would be? Those are the indicators of whether or not you, as a leader, as an organization, as a colleague, have created a space of belonging. But how do we design for these? They're not just done overnight. There are preconditions that are necessary. So there's another great book called Equity by Design. And when we take a look at this book, it says that preconditions are necessary. So there are differences between individuals and groups. We know that. What's important is that that difference or those differences have to be valued, not minimized or demonized. And we'll unpack what that means. Another precondition would be that people with power can see systems. So they aren't just looking at individual, it's beyond that, it's larger. So people with power, leaders, et cetera, administrators, can see systems and how they influence opportunities for others. And the other precondition is that people with power want to create more opportunity so everyone can thrive. Key component here, with their differences intact. So if we think about belonging, it's not to say that you can show up and just be a jerk or just say whatever you want to say. The goal is that if you have an identity that is different from someone else, that identity should not garner mistreatment because of that identity. The system, the structure, should allow for my identity to be able to be seen, heard, and valued. And so one of the ways that I thought would be important to organize this content is the 5 essentials for workplace mental health and well-being. This comes from the Office of the U.S. Surgeon General. And what I'm hoping to do in the time that I do have with you is to break down these 5 components. And in breaking down those 5 components, I want us to continue to anchor ourselves back in that HELP framework: history, equality versus equity, love, and pedagogy and practices. And in the core center of these 5, everything should be centered on worker voice and equity. Worker voice is going to be important, and you'll hear it threaded throughout each of these 5. So the first one is protection from harm. Protection from harm can look and sound a lot of different ways. The first way is through safety. So as I understand safety, I see it in a multitude of ways, but 2 ways in particular: psychological safety and physical safety. This is the psychological definition. The individual, team, or organization level belief that a given environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, vulnerability, and failure. It can be a measure by which we measure inclusion. So remember that definition of inclusion where we said, I may not agree with you, I may not have grown up like you, but I can recognize your worth and I can recognize your human dignity. Psychological safety says this is a safe place for you to take the risk to be wrong, to be vulnerable, to ask questions, to know that it's a safe space. And what that ultimately leads to is belonging. So that psychological safety, if we had to look at it through Maslow hierarchy of need, is critical. The other safety is physical. So at the base, it's a feeling of safety in the environment without worry or concern of harm, physical harm, from internal or external entities to our physical bodies. So when you see schools do drills or things that are designed to protect people physically, that feeling that if I'm in an office, if I'm in a building, that there are security measures in place that are protecting my physical body, that is the physical safety component. So as we think about protection from harm, we have two ways of interpreting that. The next one is security. So if you take a look at that graphic, and I won't go back, you'll see it in the slide deck, but how it's organized by the Office of the Surgeon General is protection from harm is safety and security. And as I analyzed and thought about what does security look like from a staff retention and recruitment lens, security can show up in the protection of your psychological safety. And so when I think about that from the lens of an educator, a mental health provider, someone who might be the lone person from a diversity lens, there's this concept called the invisible tax. And so if we are providing security to our colleagues, to our employees, how do we ensure that they don't fall victim to the invisible tax? So from a school perspective, this is how we can look at it. Over here on the right-hand side in the blue is a quote from a great colleague in the Philadelphia area, Sharif El-Mekki. And Sharif does a lot of work around the recruitment and retention of educators of color, in particular Black men. And when he was interviewed for an article, he mentioned what this invisible tax means. So let me unpack it. He says, they, meaning Black male teachers, feel honored and appreciated that they are asked. But when so many different people are asking them for help, it becomes a burden. He told King, John King, that teachers of color often want to be a resource for white colleagues to learn how to better support students of color. However, if everyone was asked to improve their relationships with these students, it would feel empowering. And essentially, what I take from that quote is, we want to be a support, and I'm speaking we as an educator of color. We want to be a support. We want to offer insight. But if the only reason people come to us for support is because we share an identity with the student and not because of the skill sets that we have, then it's almost like passing responsibility. And so we want everyone to be comfortable, confident, and able to engage with every student that they encounter without relying on utilizing that one teacher or maybe two teachers of color to be the spokesperson or the person that can best support that student. In addition to that, the quote over on the left says, William Hayes said, the pressure of being the lone Black or brown male educator in a school, while simultaneously charged with being the main mentor, disciplinarian, and relationship guru for all students who share similar backgrounds, can be overwhelming. That's in a school setting. The same thing can happen in settings where no children exist, meaning in our offices, in our organizations, etc., where there might be just one person that represents an identity and all questions about that identity go to that person. Or the expectation that if there's, and I'm just going to use an example for me, if there is someone of color and there's a school district that's urban and has a population that looks like me, that I'm the person sent out because there's an assumption that I'll have a better rapport. That's an invisible tax. That's not securing my psychological, and in some cases, sometimes physical safety because of the toll that can take. The next one is connection and community. And so social support is a part of that connection and community component. So protection from harm, connection and community. So how do we build up that connection? How do we allow staff members that we're seeking to recruit and staff members that we're seeking to retain to feel that connection? One of the ways are listening sessions and surveys. And one thing that I will say, surveys are fantastic, but they shouldn't be the only thing we do, because they're only going to tell you a part of the story. They're going to give you sort of the starting place on where you should focus some of your energy, but the actual rubber meeting road is when you can hear directly from people. So those listening session opportunities are critical, and those can be ideally provided quarterly, monthly, however often you think you may need them as a leader. And they don't have to be a huge to do. It could just be, I want to huddle up every month with my team, and I just want to hear from you. I just want to hear what's working well, what's not. Those things can make a difference. The second item, a pizza party is not enough. I don't know if you've seen any of these things on social media, how people who are employees say, I am struggling. And the one thing my boss wants to do is say, I know you're having a rough time, team. We've really been working hard. So I decided to have a pizza party. Well intended, don't get me wrong. But what the folks are saying is that that's not enough. That doesn't help me when I'm struggling. That doesn't help the team as we're struggling. So, how do we go beyond that and develop those authentic relationships where we do get the insight and hear the truth from employees about their experience? The third item is employee resource groups, or ERGs. And some people have a mixed reaction to that. But what I have found and have seen in these instances in working with organizations, school districts, et cetera, is that they can really be helpful. Two things to consider though. One, and if you're not familiar with employee resource groups, let me unpack that really quickly. Sometimes groups of people that have a shared identity may want time together because they have an understanding of each other, or they want to talk through things that maybe other colleagues won't fully understand. And so that space can be a time where they can feel that belonging or that connection. Remember, I showed you my mom's office, the assistant principal's office, that normally would have been a place students don't want to go, but we wanted to go there because there was safety there. Employee resource groups can do that for some groups of people. In addition to that, employee resource groups can not only be a place of safety, but it can be a place of action. So if these groups are gathering together, they can say, we're noticing that when we come in, there's no real welcoming feeling. And taking that back to leadership and saying, from a culture perspective of this organization, why would I want to stay here when I don't feel like I belong or I don't feel welcome? So those are ways that socially we can leverage those relationships to make improvements. Some people often ask me, if we do a listening session, like, what should we ask? What are the questions? And so I'm glad you asked, because there's a great book called Street Data by Shane Saphir and Jamila Dugan, and they actually give sample questions if you want to do some of that staff feedback. And here are a few for you to consider. What is something in your practice that you're feeling good about or proud about right now? What's frustrating you or keeping you up at night? What is one critical change you'd like to see in our school culture, our systems or structures? And you can substitute school with whatever piece that you're connected to. And then what feedback do you have for me as a leader or a colleague to support creating our school as a place where all can experience belonging? I actually did this in a school district in PA in asking staff some of these questions, and it was mind-boggling to see some of the staff literally take a deep breath and say, no one's ever asked me these questions. And I'm so glad I can finally say what I think. So it's powerful. And that staff feedback is building connection because it's showing a level of care. Remember that love and help. And so when we think about what is belonging, I come back to that Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity book and offer the second part of that definition. Remember, appreciation, validation, acceptance, and fair treatment. The second part is acknowledging that when people feel that they belong, they aren't distracted and worried about being treated as a stereotype or a singular part of their multidimensional personhood. Meaning, I don't have to be concerned that I'm showing up as a woman and having people expect me to be sensitive. I can just be myself. And if I cry, I cry. That is a true feeling of belonging. We can take it up a notch and go into other identities that may be stereotypical. And people assume because you fall into those stereotypes that you are representing something. And if I feel like I truly belong, I won't even care. I'll just show up as me. But for some of us, that is not always an option. And we're constantly worried about it. Our students are constantly worried about it. And so belonging is something that we seek to achieve so that people can feel like authentically I am here and I'm able to be a contributing member of this organization. So when belonging is absent, and this is at the employee level, we talked about that emotional labor and the psychological toll it can take if you're overly consumed all the time about how you're showing up, what you're wearing, how your hair is styled. People make comments. Very briefly, I can remember working in an organization and I would dread seeing one of my colleagues because I knew that she was going to say to me, "Oh, wow, you look tired." I hated that. And I wanted to say to her so badly, "I woke up and looked in the mirror today and I know I look tired." I don't need you to point that out. That's emotional labor. The anxiety about worrying about if I say something back to her, am I going to be seen as the aggressor? There's pressure to perform perfectly. I introduced you to my mom very briefly. As I said, she was an educator, and she would always teach me, "Nikole, you've got to stay 10 steps ahead in order to even be heard or seen." So belonging means I got to always be on if I want authentic belonging or the perception that I'm belonging. And that's almost impossible to keep up. And then navigating assaults on dignity. We'll talk about those in a moment, but those assaults, if they keep happening over and over again, even if they're benign and unintentional, that can draw people to leave. That can draw people to say in the recruitment phase, this isn't for me. So those three components are critical when we can say belonging is absent. That's how we can see it. And so I want you to do a quick reflection. Describe a time you felt the need to change or hide something about yourself to conform or to achieve something in order to gain acceptance or feel good about yourself. And for some of us, maybe we can't think of a time, but we might know someone who had to change themselves or adjust to fit in. And like I said, it may not be you, and that doesn't make you a bad person. It's just identifying that some of us do have those moments on a consistent basis. Understand that even though we are provided opportunities, and we collectively, all of us, are given opportunities to get a new position or to stay in a position or advance in a position, that's access. Belonging is just as important. So simply because I get a promotion in a job, if I don't feel like I belong, I'm still not going to stay very long because that promotion only added to the pressure to make sure that belonging is available to me. The next concept is belonging uncertainty. That sort of goes along with that reflection. And this has the potential to undermine all the goals that we're setting around retention, recruitment of a diverse staff in particular. And when I say diverse, I want to be clear. Diverse can mean ethnic, racial, cultural, sexual, religious. If we want a truly diverse staff, we have to be available and willing to say we have not necessarily created a space where all of those identities can thrive. And why? Our voice is muted? Are we ignoring certain people? Or do we assume that they're okay because they're quiet? Belonging uncertainty would be an example like Clynita invites me to her home and she says, "Hey, we're having a party. I want you to come to it. Just show up. We're just having friends." And I show up in a full-length gown. And she goes, "Well, welcome," because she's nice. "Well, welcome. Come on in." Meanwhile, others in the house or in the room are looking at me with a side eye or whispering or saying, "What she got on?" And now I'm starting to absorb those smirks, those looks, and I'm becoming uncertain of myself and I'm becoming like uncomfortable and I want to leave. That's belonging uncertainty. In a very concrete, easy example, But imagine that on a consistent basis coming into your place of employment that you depend on for your livelihood. You don't want to stay there. You're miserable there, and it can impact every other facet of you. This next one is work-life harmony. So let's recap. We had protection from harm, connections, right? Work-life harmony. Because what we've learned is that balance is almost unrealistic to achieve. Work-life balance. It's hard. It's almost impossible. So what we should seek is harmony, because one is always maybe going to outweigh the other. But how do we get to a place where we can feel some homeostasis or some contentment with the balance that we're seeking to achieve? And so one of the ways we can do that is through autonomy. And that's providing autonomy to our colleagues, to our employees, etc. Autonomy is a huge thing. A while ago, I recorded a video of different colleagues and I asked them to say, I feel like I belong when. And I can remember one of my great friends, when she completed hers, she said, I'm given autonomy. And I remember that hitting me like a ton of bricks, because what value does that show you as an employee when someone says, I trust you. I trust that you know what you're doing. I trust your skill set, and I don't have to worry about you. So I don't need to micromanage. Autonomy can help me with my work-life harmony, because you trust that even if I'm not doing it the exact way you would have, I'm still getting it done. So providing opportunities and freedom to try out new ideas or projects in their own way that's not scripted or forced by the way things are done around here. And then also the ability to say, you're an adult, you're a professional. I love when people would say that to me. You're a professional, I trust you. Treating workers as adults, professionals, and contributors, not children or subordinates. We got to trust our people. That way they can feel like, yeah, I'm a part of this team. Yeah, I bring something to this table. Value and autonomy, work-life harmony. The next one is flexibility. I don't have to spend a ton of time here because we know how important it is to be flexible on a job. And so what I loved about a former role that I had is someone said to me, our job really never ends. As long as you get the work done, I am not going to check your calendar every hour and see what you're doing. That's another form of autonomy, but it was a trust and a flexibility that I couldn't have imagined. And I missed that part of that job. Other parts of different jobs you wish you could put together and say, that would have been my perfect role. That is one that I always reflect on and think that was great. So the focus more on project completion and reach goals, not so much on how many hours I worked in the day. An acknowledgement that there is life outside of work. So when people put up boundaries, that out of office, respect it. Respect it that they have family, that they may have an ailing parent, that they just might need a breather. And simply because it was on your to-do list doesn't mean that it is urgent for them. A life hack that I found recently is on Gmail. You can schedule send. You can probably do it on every email platform, but I discovered it on Gmail. And that schedule send has really changed me, because I was finding myself emailing people at all hours, all different times of day. And I thought about it one day and I said, Nikole, you don't like it when people do that to you, weekends, etc. So I now do schedule send, because I still checked it off my to-do list, but now I'm not making someone check it and look at their email at a time when they probably are with their family or just simply trying to get some time to themselves. Flexibility is critical. Mattering at work. Huge. This is the value component. And this is where dignity really can be situated. So there's a great book called The Diversity Gap. And in that, the author says the dignity case for pursuing diversity, remember, diversity encompasses so many things, says that all people are inherently worthy, sounds familiar? Are inherently worthy of respect, safety, encouragement, and support when they arrive at work. Those key things are imperative if we expect people to want to stay in our organizations, to want to be a part of our teams and do their best work, those things are non-negotiables. And what are those things rooted in? Dignity, honoring the dignity of a human. And so Dr. Donna Hicks, who I mentioned earlier, gives us 10 elements of dignity, because for some of us, dignity is such a broad topic that you're like, I don't even know where to start when we talk about what is dignity. But I want us to take a look at some of these, and they'll look familiar to what we've already covered. Acceptance of identity, safety, recognition, so the validation component. Remember earlier I said, I may not have fully understood your perspective, I may not have experienced what you experienced, but I can say, tell me more, or I hear you. Validating. Independence is that autonomy, enabling agency. Acknowledgement. So once I hear that you've had a concern or something is bothering you, what am I doing about it? That response to concerns is critical. Understanding. So listening to the perspectives of all, as many as you can. Inclusion. We've talked about what inclusion is. Benefit of the doubt. Giving grace. Extending trust. We are all not perfect people. We're going to say the wrong thing. We're going to sometimes do the wrong thing. Honoring dignity in someone is giving them grace to say they're human and they're prone to make mistakes. How do we extend the benefit of the doubt? In fairness, treating people with equity. Remember those shoe sizes, right? Making sure people are getting what they need so they can thrive. And then accountability. Owning when you've made a mistake, which is not always easy, but owning and apologizing for causing harm. These are the essential elements of dignity. And so what does that look like in practice, in reality? Those 4 indicators: appreciation, validation, acceptance, and fair treatment. And if you take a look at some of these 4, just unpack a few of them. So the validated one, I'm going to take a moment and just do that one. Having your lived experiences, your thoughts, your feelings recognized and accepted as real. Even if the other person hasn't experienced it, may even disagree with it, but at least can acknowledge that that is your truth. That's a form of validation. So I want you, as we're sitting here, to look at those 4. And as you're unpacking the definitions of those 4, can you describe a time when you experienced any of the above? And I hope it's been recent. And if it hasn't, maybe you got to think further back, but identify that time. What feelings came up for you? And what were the lasting effects of that? I'll share a quick story before I move forward to, as we do this. Appreciate it. Unpacking that. Having parts of your identity admired and positively noticed and or represented by people, media, and others. I'm an 80s baby. I'm a proud 80s baby. And for my other 80s babies in the room, you may remember that many of us wanted a Cabbage Patch doll. And I can remember I wanted a corn silk Cabbage Patch doll. Now, if someone knows that and they had one, go ahead and put that in the chat. But I wanted a corn silk Cabbage Patch doll. And I'm also going to say that I was a Toys R Us kid. So my mom and I would go to Toys R Us around Christmas time and take a look at the different toys. And I can remember us going down the aisle where all the Cabbage Patch dolls were. And as we walked down the aisle, I saw the doll I wanted, the corn silk doll. And as I got closer, I said, Mommy, I want her. I want her. She was a blonde with blue eyes. And my mom said, really? You want her? You don't want the one here that looks like you? Brown hair. And I said, no, because the blonde, she's the pretty one. Because what I saw on television was the Cabbage Patch with the blonde hair and the blue eyes. Now, when you see television commercials for toys and different things, they often now show people in different capacities and in different ways: skin color, hair texture, all of those different things, appreciation. So you can begin to have an appreciation of who you are. In the 80s, we didn't have that as much. So what I thought was beauty was not me. Dignity says that I can see that inner worth in me no matter what. That appreciation, that's a long lasting example that I can remember from 1985. I'm sure there are examples that you have too, and that recognition of dignity is so critical. And so what Dr. Hicks would say is that when we honor others' dignity, we strengthen our own. Huge, huge statement, and a big one. So when we're seeking to recruit people into our systems, we got to do some inventory on whether or not dignity is being honored across our system to bring them in. Oops, sorry about that. Meaning. So we talked about mattering at work. Meaning is also critical. And I would say that little things mean a lot. So building schedules around the needs of our bodies, basic bio needs, food, water, rest, etc. How many of you have been in a situation where literally if you pulled your calendar up, you have something every hour on the hour? Not even a moment for lunch, not even a moment to use the restroom, not even a minute to turn away from your laptop, just jumping from meeting to meeting. Or if you're in a building, you're running from room to room and you don't have that space. Those things take a toll. Burnout is real. So something that you may see as little really does mean a lot. Pausing in the middle of meetings for people to simply take a breath, stand or stretch, little things that mean a lot. And celebrating when people take days off to care for themselves instead of, are you really taking another day? Sometimes people need that moment, that mental health day, to simply gather their thoughts or just take a break. We all need that. So instead of finding fault with the amount of days, acknowledging, I'm so happy you're taking care of yourself. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to support you. That means a lot. It adds meaning to your work and to your life. Opportunity for growth. We're starting to wind down our time, but I do want to highlight these next few. This is a critical one. I need to see that there's something beyond what I'm doing to make me want to stay in this job, make me want to come to your organization. That is a sense of belonging as well. So learning and accomplishment are part of that component. So one section that we have to ask is, what is available to employees to develop themselves? How do I grow professionally? So the basic one is professional learning. So many of you are here today. There's 63 participants in the space. You're getting some professional learning, developing different ideas and strategies on what you want to do as a result of today. In addition, mentor-mentee relationships. This doesn't always mean supervisor or administrator with a mentee. This could be a horizontal mentor-mentee relationship, someone that I can feel connected to that maybe has been here a couple years more than me, or might even be brand new and can give me some new information to make my job better. Internships and externships. Internships, the ability to have a supervisor to sort of guide your work and guide how you're learning to be a professional. Externships, the ability to shadow someone and see them in action and gain ideas and structures and strategies from them. One that I would highly recommend and that I wish I'd had a while ago, leadership coaching. Coaching is critical. And if you have, some people call them executive coaches as well. If you have that person that you can bounce ideas off of or share scenarios and say, how would you have approached this? And they give you skills and strategies on how to do that, critical to the development of your professional life. Some other questions would be, what is available for advancement? Being in a situation where you're not seeing the ability to advance, for some of us, can be a deal breaker. But in that advancement, how do I as an employee have some decision-making power with my supervisor about what that looks like? Not just simply being told, you know what, we're going to make you this person because we think you're better suited for it than someone else. And I'm not 100% comfortable taking on that role. I'm probably not going to do as well as I possibly could do. The ability to demonstrate skills outside of my role. So if I've been hired to be, and I'm going to use me as an example, a consultant, and yet I can do work that's related to leadership, how can I get some of those opportunities to demonstrate that? And that goes with those leadership opportunities. So what we have to think about is how we redesign pipelines and entry points to the workforce, prioritizing dignity regardless of the role, the salary, or the educational level of who we are attempting to recruit and retain. So where to start? As we wrap up, I wanted to give you sort of a map of how you could think about all of this and be intentional about it. And what I would offer are Cotter's 8 steps for leading change. Because this isn't just about one group of staff or one individual. Organizationally, how do you create change in your organization to create better spaces of equitable practices and inclusive communities that get to a place of belonging? And so this is a lot on one slide, and I recognize that, but I wanted to put the 8 steps all together so that you have them at the ready. Number 1 is to create a sense of urgency. Urgency may look different from every setting, but in some places, if we're in a crisis with retention and recruitment, we're in a place of urgency. So how do we build the momentum to build a vision together on how we can make this better? The next thing is to build a guiding coalition. Typically, these are volunteers, people that you know are interested in this work or interested in this change, whatever the innovative change is, and you have their commitment. They are internal people typically that help you as the leader guide the work, coordinate it, and communicate its activities. That network or guiding coalition, because there's a volunteer army that I'll get to in a minute. Before we get there, you want to have a vision. What is the strategic vision? How will what you do be different from the past? Remember history? How are we going to learn from it and make sure that there is buy-in into that reality that we see in the future that's directly linked to the vision? Once we have sort of that logic model, that visioning, that why established, then we can enlist a volunteer army. So it sounds a little daunting, but what they're saying is who in your guiding coalition can begin to create the groundswell to make and think differently about how to make people understand what it is you're doing. And so if you can get some people to buy in, and it may not be everybody, they become part of that volunteer army and they're seeking to also reach that goal with you. Once you have that, you now can move to the final 4, enabling action to remove barriers. So knowing what our barriers are, which hopefully you've been able to unpack what might be happening through the volunteer army, through the strategic visioning process, what might get in your way? And when we know better, we do better. So in knowing better, how do we make sure we clear the way for those roadblocks not to be things that get in the way every time and can make sure impact happens? The next one is to generate short-term wins. Sometimes we focus so much on the ultimate goal and we say we're failing because we haven't hit this threshold. It's being able to recognize the small wins and that those wins are coming as a result of the work that you're chipping away at. Those wins need to be communicated early and often so that people, the volunteers that you just enlisted in the Army, can see that something is happening in a way that's showing impact. This next one I love, sustained acceleration. So once you start to get that momentum going and those wins are starting to come short term, push harder. Don't slow up. Don't get comfortable. Push harder. And that just shows you that you have the potential to impact and influence the system, the structure, and policies. And I love this. Be relentless with initiating change after change until that vision becomes a reality. And then lastly, put it in place. Institute change. Articulate the connections between what's new, what you've been able to put in place, and the success that you're now seeing as a result, so that they now become habits, the business as usual, but constantly be in a place of evaluation because there's always room to get better, always room to grow. And as we consider those different things that I said really create mentally healthy workplaces, they're not easy to achieve overnight. This map can provide the structure on how you can build those things out, train up people, coach people up on how to get to a place of focusing on flexibility, autonomy, social support, all the things we just went through. And so my question to you as I close my time is, where will you begin? What is that starting place for you? The urgency may already be there. You may not need to start there. For others of you, it is starting at starting one, ground zero. Ask yourself, where will you begin? Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop share and see if there are questions, and then pull this back up for the final housekeeping items.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hollins-Sims. That was extraordinary. It seems like a lot of this should be like no brainer, right? Like this is stuff we should know how to do, and yet we don't take time to do it, or really we don't know how to get started. So this is really wonderful. I have one question here to get us going, but if folks have questions that they would like to ask, please put it in the Q&A feature. So the first question is, are ERGs equal to affinity groups?
That's a great question. Some would say yes. Affinity groups are very similar to ERGs. And like I said in the presentation, sometimes they can be operationalized in two different ways. So one would be the space where people who have like identities or like experiences just want a space to be together. The other would be, we want to be an agent for change as a group, and we want to be spokespeople for how to increase and improve that feeling of belonging in our setting. So yes, affinity groups are very equivalent to ERGs. Great question.
A long one just came in, so I'm going to read it, so bear with me.
Okay.
Okay, 95% of our employees say their work matters to them quite a bit or a tremendous amount. And that's about 3,000 people. 90% say the work they do is quite meaningful or extremely meaningful to them. And 65% are overwhelmed and or exhausted frequently or almost always. We must discuss school district cultures that continue to reinforce clubs of unsustainable hyperachievement and martyrdom and hustling for worthiness. Relational aggression tends to thrive in these places, including psychological safety and belonging, while increasing bias. And confronting toxic cultural values is a way to honor the dignity of others, and it's energetically expensive. Have you seen or heard about schools or districts that have successfully addressed these issues in a way that doesn't continue to expect those who have experienced harm, so educators, leaders, and paraprofessionals, to do most of the heavy lifting? And where have you seen educators get into good trouble and achieve measurable improvement in belonging and well-being? Thank you for that, Chris.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'm glad I could open the Q&A. So Jen, as you were reading, I could follow you. That was so helpful. And I appreciate the detail, because I think it's helpful for everyone on this call to hear that. And I just want to acknowledge that last part, which is, how do we address the issues in a way that doesn't continue to expect that invisible tax I talked about, those that have had to do some of, or have experienced some of this dishonor dignity, to have to lead the charge. So I would say that in a school district that I supported most recently, what I found is that when they were having open and honest dialogue among their administrative leadership team, that tended to be a way that the shouldering of some of this didn't fall on just their DEI director. Because in some cases, that's where it tends to land. The DEI director, the climate officer, whatever you want to call it, tends to be the person everyone looks to quote unquote fix the problem. And what I found is, when we had some candid conversations about equity traps and tropes, which one of them is, if you acknowledge or put in place an equity warrior, if that person burns out and leaves, all of that work, all of that insight, all of that you need is now gone. So you have to spread the wealth out. And when we had that candid conversation, it doesn't mean that everything changed overnight. It just means that things got a little bit easier for that person to not feel like they had to shoulder it all. I also agree with the relational aggression And, that increases bias. I think when we're creating these clubs, we do have to be cognizant that we may be creating some silos that, while unintentional in some cases, may promote some of the very things we don't want to see in our work and school culture. So I think it's just being aware and being able to call those things in and acknowledging that they exist.
Wonderful. Thank you. So first of all, of course, we want your feedback. Help us know how this particular presentation impacted you and your work. And also it helps us report to the sponsor of this work, SAMHSA. And as a reminder that if you complete this evaluation, you will not only be able to access your certificate of attendance and Washington in service forms, but you will be entered to win one of Dr. Nikole Hollins-Sims' books, as you can see here, Creating Equitable Practices in PBIS. We will not do the drawing today. We will do that offline and contact the winner. So good luck to all of you. And if you didn't get enough of Dr. Hollins-Sims, we will get to see her again next time on Thursday, February 8th. And we would love to see you, and that will be Becoming the Journey of a Change Agent. Love the name. And then again, as Dr. Graffenried explained, following that one in March, we'll start discussing bullying prevention. And the first is with Dr. Rhonda Neese in March. And then I believe in April, we'll have Dr. McDaniel with a different piece of that. I will provide a disclaimer that this presentation was prepared for the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center under a cooperative agreement with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, that's SAMHSA, and that everything represented here is the work of the author and doesn't necessarily mean that SAMHSA is in agreement. You know how these go. All right. And then if you need to connect with the Smart Center and Northwest MHTTC, there's a variety of ways to do so. We invite you to follow us on social media. We are on, I guess it's X now, and on Facebook, and we're working on some LinkedIn, maybe Instagram, so you can follow us in all your favorite ways. And we'll remind you that this was recorded, and when it is available, we will send it out to everyone that registered for this session, and it will also be made available on the website. And I wish you all luck with possibly getting this book. So I want to thank Dr. Nikole Hollins-Sims again. There's lots of wonderful praise coming in the chat. So I want to join everyone and thanking you for sharing your wisdom with us today. Okay, well, I wish everyone a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for taking time to join us and learn with us. And we look forward to seeing you next month in our next session with Dr. Hollins-Sims.